This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
We take chances every day for our goals, to get further along, to make changes, whether it's in the workplace, it's at home. In life, we have all these decisions. When we wake up, we're driving. When we're at work, relationships at home and work, the kids, the schedules, all these decisions that we have to make. And, it just comes back to like what your goals are, where you're headed, and what are you willing to do to get there. But while you're trying to get your game on and try to proceed forward with whatever your endeavors are, obviously you have goals, personal and business, right? You have to be good with your coworkers, your boss, your partners, your investors, whoever it might be. Obviously, connection with your spouse and your children, and a connection with faith and your overall health. And you have all these distractions that come in, right? You get off your game as time goes on because outside influences come in. But every day we have to take a chance, right? We have to decide what are we willing to give up and what are we willing to fight for. And I know there's a lot of people I've talked to, and we get stuck in this rat race of fighting for certain things. But at the same time, we've got to give up stuff, right? You can't be in a different spot with your goals, your ambitions, by holding on to certain things because it ties up too much time, resources, money, whatever it might be. You have to give up. And they're in the business planning of things, whether it's revenue generated, cost control measures, expansions, whatever it might be, including benefit spending. You have to give up certain things to keep making progress. So you just have to keep asking yourself the question of, like, what is it going to take to grow? What does it take to keep moving forward and what to make that goal achievable, right? What do you need to keep that drive to keep going, right? It's like a muscle, right? And the muscle, you have to work all the time. If you went to the gym for hours on a couple days, maybe a couple weeks, right? You're probably not going to hit your goals. You might have some immediate gains right away because you just went from less activity to more activity. But the reality is that you don't gain results if you do a whole bunch all at once and then you start giving up. This happens every January. People have a new year, new goals, the new you. They go to the gym, they start working out, they start doing all these positive things, maybe reenacting or reconnecting with relationships, whether it's your spouse, your children, family members, coworkers, partners, wherever it might be. And eventually it fizzles out, right? It takes a lot of work to keep going. It's like a marathon, right? So one reason people don't ever run 26 miles is because they quit. And that's the reality. They're not committed long enough, and maybe they don't want it either. And that's what happens. They don't want it big enough to be in the gym consistently enough times to keep going, right? Other things become more important. They get in the way. They fill the calendar, right? And so that's why even with some time blocking strategies in a calendar, whether it's personal or business related, the time blocking, you could put in non-negotiables, right? These have to happen no matter what. No phone calls, no emails, no connections, whatever it might be. They're non-negotiables. But a lot of times what happens is other things get in the way. And we're all human, though, because you could still put time blocking things and non-negotiables in, and they still get overturned by other things or things that are urgent or seem to be more pressing. And it happens, right? So you have to regain focus, get back on track. There's nothing wrong with derailing and coming back. Just a matter of keeping the drive going and keep moving. The reality is the muscle needs to be worked every single day in some capacity, right? You can't work biceps every single day. Sorry, guys. It's not going to help you out at the beach. If you work with biceps every single day, you're not going to get the results that you're going to do. Same thing with a lot of things, but you could break it down to the ridiculous. You could make it super small. Then some of those micro pieces you could actually work on every single day. It could be a long-term goal, and it could be related to business, right? You're not going to sell $1 million in one day, but you could break it apart throughout the entire year and sell, whatever the number comes out, $10,000 a day, right? It makes it a lot smaller. How much is that per hour? How can you do benchmarks? How can you keep track of it to a point where it keeps you focused and engaged and keep you pursuing for the goal? But unfortunately, many people will default and go back to their more comfortable less gritty, less focused self, right? In many capacities, right? And so it's much easier to go back to the old way and be comfortable because you start justifying why it really works, right? It works this way because there's too much conflict on the other side, or it works this way because it's really just easier for everybody else. And that happens a ton. But the reality is you're never going to get to the point where your goal is 5 years, 10 years go down the road and you still don't hit the goal that you had 10 years ago. And here you are, you're still struggling with it. It's always easy to do the easy things. It always is. Same thing happens with benefit renewals. So it's either the broker or the employer that retreat on any plan, action plan to make changes at some point in time. And usually it's during the year. So you handle this renewal, you're getting forced to make decisions because of a double-digit increase. So partners, business owners, board of directors, HR, whoever it might be, they start panicking. The broker may panic too because they don't want to lose the business. And here they are making decisions based on impulse response because now they get a double-digit increase. But the reality is they didn't work a plan. They didn't have a plan, right? They may think they have a plan, but it's reality. It's not strong enough, big enough, whatever it might be, to keep things going. They're not willing to give up what they were used to doing to keep moving forward in a better direction. So, but the reality is that none of the results are going to be immediate. They get this double-digit increase. A lot of people look for this magic wand approach, saying, just get this number back down, and just in pure magic, they want this thing to go away, and it doesn't. In some cases, it does. Right? You have this immediate gratification. You finally get some results. Sometimes it's just the broker going back to the carrier asking for a rate relief. Like we just did this for a larger account, and they took it down. They split the increase in half. Right? So it made it from double digits to single digits. The employer was happy. The reality is did I really do my job? Absolutely not. I did status quo job. Right? All I did was ask the question, what can we do? Like we looked at claim ratios, we looked at other things. I didn't really do more than that. Like I'm not saying I didn't justify retaining the business. I'm just saying that every other broker goes out and makes this thing a big deal, and it's not. In fact, I think it's unethical for the whole industry as a whole, but that's a different conversation for a different day. And so let's say you get this immediate gratification, but now what are you going to do to make changes going forward, right? It's almost like all you're trying to do is replace the unlimited credit card that you just had with another unlimited credit card for your employees, that is, and they can just go spend whatever they want. So maybe you got a better interest rate, right? So like, all right, we're going to switch to this one. You got a better interest rate. You're going to save some money. But the reality is the expenses are still there, and then no one's controlling those costs. And that's, again, another conversation for another day. But there might be times where you're going to say this year's going to be different, or maybe you are a disciplined person in general, and you're like, no, this is new information for me. Let's stay the course, right? And you claim you're in it for the long haul, right? When others are going to quit, you're just going to keep going, right? We've heard many of this, right? Some of it's fake, some of it's real, right? At some point, it dies off, but you still claim I'm in it for the long game. It's like going to the gym, right? And all of a sudden it went from going to the gym every day to 3 times a week to all of a sudden you're barely going once a week just to try to maintain. And then I know some people that actually go once a month and feel like they go to the gym, right? I'm still going. I'm in the long haul. This is going to work, right? And so, and gym is just an example. It could be walking or running a track. It could be body movements. It could be in your garage, but whatever it might be to kind of keep things going healthy-wise, right? And you're thinking about yourself, at least I'm working out, right? I'm in the long game, right? And so, but the reality is it'll take you years to get the results you're looking for. Years, right? And you might get some immediately or over a period of time because you're doing maybe more activity than less, and that's awesome, and that's a step in the right direction. Some people have small goals, and that's okay too. And they're not ready to go big and go strong and all those fun stuff that some people drive for. Some people want smaller incremental goals, and that's fine too. But again, you're going to have smaller goals. You're going to have smaller results. It's going to take you longer to get there. But some people will still claim that they're in the long game, right? And that's fine too. But the reality is that it's like cancer, right? If you don't work hard enough, fast enough, and I'm not saying that this cures cancer, but like if you don't focus on what you're supposed to do, it's just going to keep spreading, right? And so it could be a snowball debt situation. Obviously, in healthcare, it's a snowball premium increase every single year. And so how do you start softening that and reversing the trend and going back the other way? And usually what happens in the boardroom, business owners, partners, CFOs, board of directors, whoever's in that room, that roundtable discussion when it comes to any type of business expenses. But the focus here is, benefit related. And so, they talk about making changes in the renewal, and some of it has an immediate impact, some of it doesn't. But, a lot of those renewal meetings out there are, they're still faced with double-digit increases next year. You might get lucky and get a single digit, but it's a high single digit. It's never low. And I gave an example on another podcast, right? Some people like saying, oh, no, we're single digits, and they're proud of that, right? Well, you have Purdue University that made some changes. It's a great case study. And I think it's almost 10 years in the making now, if not, or roughly that. They made a ton of new changes on how they're going to manage cost. And this one person made a lot of executive decisions, had to convince a lot of people this was the way to go. They averaged 1% an increase ever since. So for almost 10 years now, 1% increase, right? And there's some excuses. They're big, they're strong, they got revenue, they got people, fine, right? But you could still do it on a smaller scale, right? And so 1% is completely abnormal in most traditional settings. Can you do that? Absolutely. You could absolutely do that. Now, it depends on the size of the group and dynamics and some things kind of taking place, but you don't need to be tens of thousands of employees like Purdue in order to make that happen. But you got to be consistent with things, right? You may want to meet your team on a, even initially, I'm not saying weekly is probably excessive, but monthly is probably reasonable with your broker, your team. Hey, how do we make progress? What are projects we're working on? Where are we at? What are some timelines? What are the results we have now? What's the reality of it all? And then maybe even just every quarter or start out monthly and then eventually move to every quarter. But you got to have these meetings, and somebody's got to be taking action, or multiple people have to be taking action on how to work towards that goal. But you have to keep going in order to reverse that healthcare trend. You got to keep going, whether it's revenue generated, right, or expansion, or some other cost mitigation you're trying to do with the company, right? You have to keep at it in order to reverse the trend. Others will just start giving up. And so we've had situations where like super excited because they don't want this double-digit increase anymore. So we start having meetings. We have a meeting, January. We have a meeting in February. And then we might skip a little because of spring break or something, and then we're right back at it in May, and then it starts to fizzle out, right? And it's because they've gone on to other interests and other things that are pulling their time and attention away to. And both approaches will get you to the results, right? You can play the long game, you can do the short game, whatever it might be, but you got to stay the course, whatever it might be, and have those goals. But the biggest thing is you can't give up, and you can't start making excuses. After all, I've heard even insurance brokers give up and just say, it is what it is, at least I'm getting paid. I literally have heard that hundreds of times over the last 20 plus years I've been in the business. And the reality is, so you cannot solve the problem, but somehow you're okay and grateful that you're still getting paid. In the rest of the world, if you couldn't produce the results that the business is looking for, you'd be fired, and they would move on another consulting vendor, whatever it might be. They're going to move. It really should be criminal, but I've heard this tons of times. But I mean, in reality, is some cases you can't do anything, and that's what the broker's excuses are. But they use it for everything. So there are sometimes the company just can't do anything. They're too small. There's too big of a risk inside the company. Maybe they're a government entity buying private insurance, and they're exempt from a lot of doing things because they're the government. They make rules that have to apply, but they are for other people, but not for them. And so sometimes you just can't do anything. We ran into a municipality, and they wanted to save premiums, but a lot of the programs that we have, or most brokers have, they don't qualify for because of the rules that they put in place by the federal government. So sometimes it is what it is. But again, we have a different set of cards then. Now we deal with it. But there's always something that you could do. On a smaller scale, sometimes it's harder, less leverage, but you could certainly work on things, educate the employees, figure out how claims work, maybe make less claims. Because one day, if you're in business long enough, or one day, certain situations and tides turn, you're able to save some money. And then you reverse the trend and then start heading into a different direction. But this is a very common thing where there's always justifications. A last night, literally, I was talking to a broker friend. He's a fellow veteran, and we were talking about this very thing. And we have in our industry a very content industry, right? It's very old school. They're not innovative to a certain degree. We have a lot of mainstream players out there that are trying to do good things and reverse the healthcare trend, but carving those guys out, right? We have a very comfortable, incompetent industry. At the same time, we've taught our clients how to buy. And I bet any other industry would just love the situation where you could be incompetent, have increases, your pay increases, your commissions, your whatever you're making, and at the same time not deliver any results to your client. I'm sure they would just be in heaven for at least a short period. I mean, it's a short-term game, but businesses will catch on and say, we can't do this anymore. And healthcare, for some reason, for benefit spending, it seems like it's the status quo. And we taught them how to purchase insurance, and we're able to convince them that a 8% increase or 12% increase is just okay. And in some cases, again, you can't move the needle right away, but you certainly could start going to the gym, stay consistent, do the right things, eat the right foods, drink enough water, all those things, and you have to go at it long enough. Eventually, you could start turning the tide. Even a 10-person group, 5-person group, you could start turning the tide at some point. And then this just becomes mediocre, and somehow all of a sudden we settle for mediocrity. It becomes easy to just deal with the higher benefits cost and the higher out-of-pockets for all the employees, and it just becomes acceptable because you don't have any other choice. A hardcore strategy for broker is just increase the deductible to lower the premium to satisfy the employer requirement, but it's increasing the cost to the employees. There are ways out there just to lower your costs, eliminate your out-of-pocket expenses for your employees, and then if they choose to go anywhere else, yeah, they have some skin in the game. But if you get them to focus on the higher value, lower cost facilities, you eliminate their costs. There are ways to do it. Just employers are not open-minded about it, or brokers don't want to do it because they're outside their comfort zone, or they're going to make less money. So what? Like, I met brokers where they're making 6 figures on an account. So for one example, they're making $150,000 a year on this account, and I'm not taking it away. I think it's well worth the account, the time and energy, the consulting, the service behind it, the technology, all this stuff. It's worth every penny that they're receiving in general. But if you could turn around and give them different strategies to save them money, and you make $125,000 instead of $150,000, I think you're doing disjustice to your client by retaining the $150,000. But the reality is inside baseball, a lot of those other programs, we're probably going to get paid the same. But if I could shave off a few $100,000 on the small mid-sized company, that it'll be a safe haven for them. But the reality is we spend our lives too connected with electronic devices. All right, we satisfy ourselves with mediocrity, and we don't make connections. We don't make the right resources right for those connections. You do a little Google search, and you think that's the end all be all, and put down some of the internet connections and start picking up the phone and start talking to people, right? And getting results and looking for vendors and looking for this and finding a team or rebuilding a team, whether it's internal or external. You got to keep at it and get back engaged and connected. But a lot of this disconnect could actually revert back to a lot of other things and areas in life. We see this a lot in sports, right? When it becomes acceptable to lose. Look at our Chicago area Blackhawks, right? There was one season that all of a sudden became normal just to lose. And then finally, it was like in January, I forget which hockey player it was. He was at a press conference or something, and he's like, I'm just tired of losing. I'm just tired. And all of a sudden, the next game they won, right? And so they finally have to get to a tipping point, but it becomes accepted, right? And same goes with some games, not necessarily always at the professional level, but like all of a sudden, like you go scoreless. It's like going revenueless, for a period of time. And so like, how in the world do we survive this, right? But it becomes acceptable. Like, oh yeah, we didn't score any goals last game, so this game, it's probably reasonable, right? But in business, I know people in my industry at least, but I have clients, they're telling us that they've gone weeks or months and no revenue's coming in. They're going off savings. I don't know how they do that, right? You don't wake up one day and have this internal drive to actually just keep pushing to get the results you do. They will just die listening to their own excuses. And people just need to start standing up and fighting. Same thing with the benefits, renewal. And I'm not really saying to get up and punch some guy in the face, even though I'm sure some of my brokers in the industry probably deserve, a left hook once in a while. But I'm not saying anything about that. I'm talking about fighting for the results, right? We fight every day, the week, month, right? And keep constantly fighting. Don't give up, right? It's, a lot of times in finance, with businesses, once the renewal is done, the invoice goes to finance. It was already budgeted. They already know what the numbers are, right? And people just forget about it because it becomes normal, right? But you have to keep working at it, right? You got to set the goal and keep working at it. We have tons of clients that just give up, like saying, oh, this is too hard, or we don't qualify, or, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be looking at that, or, the magic lawn, or I love the phone call when it says, hey, my business neighbor over here is paying less than I do. What am I doing wrong, right? And there's all these scenarios, right? But if you just stay the course and try to aim for bigger targets and just in general, whether it's revenue generator or benefits, right? Eventually you will achieve goals, right? And if the target is big enough, eventually you'll get there and you'll be like, holy smokes, we made it. But at the same time, you might miss, but you'll be much further along than you did. Or you end up crushing it and find out that the goal wasn't big enough. We've had that with many things, not only in business side of things, but with the benefit spending, that we would have a certain benchmark that we're trying to focus on. And all of a sudden that following year, it's a flat renewal. Like we beat the trend 1 year, right? And it's not like that every year. We have a client that has had a low single-digit increase for the last 5 years. It's partly because he has a healthy group and they're not utilizing the insurance. But besides that, he's had reverse trends. And so it is possible. You just have to stay the course, right? And it just, with like anything else, where there's going to be more technology, more complexity, more innovation, you might lose the logo on the card because you're not, because there's certain things out there that the big logos, the big companies are not willing to do. And they're willing to just keep the game because they profit from it. And people somehow are comfortable with that. Because again, we accept this mediocrity, right? So as we head into the new year, 2025, as I record this, but, stay the course and, start building the strategy and stay with it, whether it's revenue related, benefits related, connections, relationships, board of directors, whatever it might be. Just stay the fight.